Andy Street. Thanks for coming.
Nice to see you, Ben, as ever.
Yes, well, this is a slightly different format than what we normally have. It's normally at the lounge, cup of coffee, get the tissues out, tear here and there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I promised I won't be
Love
crying
it
today. But
we'll see.
I aim for this, but yeah, hopefully not. It's great for you to come along today. And as I was explaining to you, you were like, well, I'm not a youth worker. Why am I here? The reason why I've invited you on, because I know that you massively care about people, young people, community, the city. And you've done many things over a period of time, specifically with projects and strategically, that have supported that. So that's why I've asked you on, not because I want to have a coffee, although I wouldn't mind one, but Dougie's coffee machine's packed up. But let's take it back to the beginning then. So, can you remember when we first met?
Do you know, I'm trying to remember when I've got to know somebody well as I have you. And there's quite a few people I've met over the years. Some you can remember, others you get to know them really well, and I've got to know you well. Yeah. You think, where the heck did I meet Ben the first time?
Unmemorable is what he's trying to say.
No,
you're killing me.
No, not at all. Do you remember?
No.
No, there you go.
No, I tell you what, I know it was something to do with Sally Britton.
Okay.
And I can't even remember how I got connected with Sally. Right, okay. It was when we were trying to get the year-long gap program funded. Right. She suggested I speak to you, and you helped us get different people to come to the round table event up at the University.
Well, you must have said something right, because when I heard about the program, I think I swallowed it hook, line and sinker, mate. It sounded pretty good to me.
You say this, right? Yeah. And we'll get onto this later on. I didn't know anything about your background, and to be honest, I'm not someone to even ask about it, so I didn't have any clue.
Well, you probably got to know me now and wish you'd not bothered.
Well, you know, ditto, I can tell sometimes. But I do remember, I didn't know anything about your background, and then suddenly we kept meeting.
You probably don't know now.
No, I don't, but we will in a minute. And then it got to a certain point, and you could probably feel the frustration and the stress of trying to do something that made a difference, which was at that point, it was the year-long gap program, and having to try and individually sponsor each young person because we weren't in a situation to get bigger funding because of other organisations were funded and our capacity. Yep. And then you come out of the blue and we're like, right, I spoke to my partner, my wife, and we want to sponsor someone. And I remember thinking, I think that might have been the first tearful moment.
Oh, was it? Well,
I never thought,
unbelief.
Well, because I just didn't, because this was from you, and I didn't really know much about the world in the sense of businesses sponsoring things, and I never thought people did. I didn't even know people done that. And I remember thinking, I've been meeting you for X amount of months, chatting about you basically helping out in different ways with your network, getting people to talk to us, and then you said that, and I remember anyway. Actually, now I feel like it might be coming, so I'm going to shut up. So that was, I suppose that's just one example, actually, of the kind of things that you have done, and I'm sure there's millions. I don't believe that, Ben is a special case.
I think you might be overstating it a bit, but I just got what you're doing, Ben, and I could see the frustration of funding, and I'm a big believer, particularly around funding good projects, of getting people involved, getting people to understand, what you're seeking to do. And when you try to fund something from just one source, it's always going to be a challenge. If you can get a group of people involved, whether it's funding organisations, grant making, trusts or whatever, or even individuals who've got a heart for the city, it's a lot better when you've got the ability to share it across a whole group of people or organisations. It's just a smarter way of funding, and it's something that I'm a big believer in. Partnership and collaboration is something I'm passionate about, alongside relationship.
Well, I mean, let me be clear then, that year-long gap programme would not have happened if it wasn't for the partnership and collaboration of individual businesses and sponsors sponsoring each young person. And that was a completely different world to me. Not straightforward, lots of work, but the support of people like yourself, supporting to meet with different people and start those conversations was huge. So let me start by saying thank you, and then let's find out a bit more about you, because I'm going off track already.
That's all right.
You've got a good way of doing this. So What was it like for you, Andy, when you were growing up? What were the positives? What were the negatives?
Gosh, you didn't tell me what questions you were going to ask.
I purposely didn't.
So
I wanted you to come.
I grew up. I'm very proud of my Yorkshire heritage. Both my mum and dad come from Yorkshire, but after the war, they moved initially to Reading, where I was born. And then they moved when I was 3 to southeast London, innit? So I grew up in Bromley, and went to school there. I guess I was the youngest of 3 by some way. So it wasn't that I grew up as a single child, but both my brother and sister, by the time I got to sort of 10 or 11, 12, they sort of moved on. In many ways, I had a typical white middle class privileged background. I went to a decent school, and it was a very safe environment, and particularly in those days, it was urban London, but it was safer probably than urban parts of any city are these days. But went to uni.
What did you study at uni?
I studied civil engineering at university.
Okay.
And my wife and I knew each other as teenagers.
Oh.
It's the old, I'm going to get you crying now, mate. Teenage sweethearts.
Oh, no,
and we're still together 50 years later.
Blimey. I need to give her a medal.
Well, I think she probably is the one that definitely deserves a major award for putting up with me. But I think my life, in many ways, it has privilege written all over it, and still does. But there have been some key moments in my life, in more later life, certainly in my 40s, where I think that my sense of privilege was jolted a little bit, and I went on a bit of a journey understanding what it was for a city like Bristol to be what it is in terms of that division between privileged and people who are not so privileged. And that's been particularly the last 20 years, that's been a key part of my journey.
I guess then that having, without having those experiences to see what the different sides of the coin there might be, you don't necessarily then have the experiences to make the decisions to do something about
Correct.
it.
Yeah.
So I'm always on the side of when people, I have a bit of a class thing on my head growing up in a working class situation, but then I meet, and it's meeting different people like yourself. People are people, aren't they? Mm. And a lot of people want to do good, and some don't. But that's from every background and every class. Mm. But so once you went through your childhood,
yep.
and you went to uni,
yep.
you studied engineering.
Yep.
What was your pathway then? Because you're talking about purpose and making a difference, but you didn't just jump straight into those kind of things, did you?
No, I didn't. No. So, I went to university. My wife trained to be a nurse. We were both in London, got engaged. Realised we couldn't afford to live in London. So my wife still says, why didn't we go north? Because that's, as I say, what my roots are. But he ended up, a job came up in Bristol with a consultancy back in 1980, and got offered the job, moved to Bristol, and worked for that company for 16 years. Did pretty well by then. We'd had 2 kids.
What was that job? When you say the word consultancy to the masses?
Yeah, although I'm an engineer, my career has been in the environmental sector. In those days, back in the 80s, it was very much the engineering side of environment. So I was involved, particularly in waste management, actually, both mining waste, but also, the sort of stuff we stick in our bins. In those days, we put most of it in landfill. So I was involved in the early stage of applying proper engineering design to landfill sites to make sure they were properly lined and engineered, and we were collecting all the stuff that you get out of landfills. And that was in very early stage of my career, and it was cutting edge work. It was enjoyable. The company that I was with, we were doing things like cleaning up contaminated land and designing mines and quarries. So it was the engineering side. Right. And then in my as I came towards 40, and I'm nearly 70 now. 5 of us started a new business, SLR. So if you see my signature at the end, it says SLR.
Yeah.
And we started that business. And then it became over time a much broader, as the environment changed from, engineering cleanup of contaminated land and designing landfills, we got into the whole issue now of climate change and carbon management.
Yeah, but that was
much softer side. So it's that journey for me over 45 years of my career has changed dramatically. But it's all been environmental focused.
When you say that things have changed, and I remember someone when my kids were born, I wrote a book for my son, basically a poem thing, whatever.
Yeah.
I just felt like I wanted to do so, and I don't know why. I'm quite creative. Done it for my daughter as well, all around environmental, social impact kind of stuff, but connected to other things that are quite funny as well.
Yeah.
And someone said, and I showed it to someone, and they were like, "You should read Dr. Seuss. That's a similar kind of style." And I was like, "What?" So I mean, I'm not necessarily from a background of reading much at all, if I'm honest with you. I do now. And I remember reading it and thinking, "Blimmin' hell, this bloke, when was this written?" And then I looked at, this is like the 70s. I mean, obviously you're going to be aware of all this. The 70s, someone writing children's books was bang on the money with all the climate crisis, which the wording's been changed, hasn't it? Yeah. Because of that, all these kind of things. So way back when, it was known.
Yeah.
And the changes didn't happen. Yeah. And then we talk about it now like it's a new problem. Yeah. So you were working on things, it sounds
I mean,
a long time ago.
We were doing stuff now. I think all I'd say is that in those days, I think we were aware there were challenges. But I think, as we've seen, the acceleration of negative impact on the environment, global warming, global change, etc., climate change, etc., then I think the awareness and the urgency of having to do something has become all the more apparent. And as a business, certainly SLR, we have moved away. When we first started, 5 of us were largely in the engineering side. By then, by the time I got to 40, we weren't sticking everything in landfills. We were starting to look at recycling processes and processing waste and getting value out of it. Now, another 30 years later, we barely talk about waste. We talk about resource management, and it's a much broader field. The circular economy, rather than creating waste, how can we take material that
utilize things within the day-to-day use
to actually turn it back into something of real value? So it's been fun, but one of the big things for me, of course, is that it's a 30-year-old company. We were 5, we're now 5,000. It's grown huge and it's global. But after 10 years, when I'm just coming up to 50, there's a story behind why I did it. But I decided to resign from the board and go part-time. So at 50, I went to 4 days a week. A few years later, I went to 3 days a week. So gradually over 16, 17 years, I've reduced my time, and that's enabled me to increase the time that I commit to the city. And I've had the privilege, of being able to still be doing some professional work, and it gives you a bit of credibility if you're still involved in a successful business. But it's enabled me to create space to get to know people in the city and to do a little bit of stuff. Yeah. And to discover the joy of meeting people in every community of this city, coming from every background, and having a common sense of we're all in this together. So for you and me, Ben, you come from a different place.
Don't start with all this.
Different place.
I got the tissues.
And you would have faced challenges that I would never have faced. But we get on well. We're mates. Yeah. But prior to my enlightenment, if you will, in my late 40s, I wouldn't have seen the importance and the relevance in that. But it's vitally important that in a city like ours, that there's a sense of relationship right across the board, and it means a lot to me.
I think we're
don't cry.
I'm not going to. I'm definitely going to come back and touch on the relationship thing. Yeah, I think that's key to kind of everything that we all do. Yeah. As we spoke about many times. So you get to 40 years old. Yeah. It sounds like this business is 40, 50. Sorry, is going going places.
Skyrocketing.
It's made a lot of money.
And I decided to back out of it.
And so you're at this point. You've been working very hard, no doubt.
Yeah.
You're
every hour that's God's
global. This has gone.
Yep.
This is as a business person. This is at this point you think I have made it.
Yeah.
What happens to make you think?
Right.
I don't want to do this.
So this is going to be. I don't often talk about this.
Talk about it.
I don't often talk about it, particularly in public.
Don't talk about things you don't want to. Sorry.
No. It's not that. It's just. It's a journey I've been on. You will know, Ben, that for me, a key part of my what shapes me as a person is faith. Yeah. Over the years, I have grown to enjoy relationship with people that share that faith, that might share a completely different faith, who've got no faith whatsoever. So although for me personally, faith is important, it's shaped me, that doesn't make me in any way be judgmental about
I know, because I share many values with you and I don't have faith. Do you know what I mean? So it's like,
and
there's a commonality.
That is the wonderful thing.
Yeah.
But for me, I'd got to my mid-40s. At 45, the business had been going for 5 years. It was growing rapidly. I had 2 kids who were doing well. There were two of the best schools in the city. I was involved in my local church, and that was growing rapidly.
Speak up, Andy. They're going to want to hear this.
I had a wife who loved me. Well, why wouldn't she? Because it was me. My goodness me. And I got to 45, and life was jolling along. It was great, and I had many ways. Although I was taking it for granted. Really, work was my identity. And all the other things that I had were parts of that set of, things that I'd accumulated to show that I had a life that was worthwhile. And at 45, and this is more about my daughter, not about me. Our daughter, I don't often speak about this, but she was in her mid-teens and she was very ill with ME.
What's that stand for?
It's chronic fatigue. It's the best known, and it can be quite severe. And Emma, our daughter, was severely ill for 4 or 5 years, and I guess it was a tough place for her, but it also shook me out of my. I think my position of just assuming everything would come my way and it'd be great. And I can remember being quite angry for a year, particularly with God. My mind.
Did you question your faith at that point?
Yeah, to a degree.
Yeah.
I think it did. Why has all that happened? It was almost thinking, well, I deserve everything good that was happening, and it was a bit of a. I was seeing things in a completely different way and wrong way. And a year in, I came to a place where I suppose I could have chosen 2 ways. I could have walked away from my faith, or I could have said, well, if I believe in this God, then, I'm going to pursue what he's got to say about it. So I prayed a lot, spent a lot of time with my wife talking about it, and I guess I found that my view of the world and the city and society changed. I stopped taking too many things for granted in terms of privilege. It wasn't that I didn't care about people who are homeless.
If you don't know, you don't know.
It wasn't that I didn't care about parts of the city that were far less better off than Stoke Bishop, where I lived. It wasn't I didn't care at all. Far from it, I did. I didn't know them. For most of South Bristol, I barely visited. I didn't know lots of people who came from a different ethnic background. I didn't know lots of people that came from a different social background. I noticed people were sleeping homeless, but I didn't take enough time to stop and get to know them, sit down in the gutter with them and have a coffee. I didn't do that. Not because I didn't care about them. It was because I wasn't engaging in them.
Or did you have the time? I think time is a key part as well as relationships.
I was too busy with work and doing my family stuff and thinking I was contributing to society, but I'm not sure I was. And that's not a judgment on people that haven't been on my journey at all. It's just my own journey. And so I got to a stage where I realised that I got my priorities wrong. My identity was work. My identity was a successful family. My identity was being part of a growing church. I guess as I got through my late 40s and our daughter was still ill, towards 50, I realised I had to let something go. I was holding on to stuff and I had to let it go. And I decided that I could choose to continue doing what I was doing for the next 15, 20 years and retire at 65 and go play golf. Or I could do something else. I didn't know what the something else was, but I knew something on my heart that was stirring that says I need to discover more about purpose. So at 50, remarkably, our daughter was well again. I mean, it's without going into the detail, it was remarkable. And she recovered, and she's recovered well, and she's now happily married with 3 kids. And
she runs her own charity, doesn't she?
She runs
that makes
her
a
own
difference as well.
With Urban Pursuit and Neil, and that makes a huge difference with young people.
I know.
How about that?
I think I might have bumped into them the other day.
You probably have met them, but. And I guess I got to 50, and I having committed to standing back. It was interesting, that the business has grown, and we've had the benefit of private equity investment in the business.
What's that mean? You've got shares in the business,
so
you still get paid from the business?
I was a founding director of the business.
So all founders have a certain amount.
We have an ownership in the business. We'd actually set it up such that our share as owners of 5 owners. It wasn't. We wanted to share it with other people in the business too. Right. So I had a big ownership of the business. It was going well. At 50, we had an event where a business invested in SLR, and it wasn't as if I had the excuse, well, I'm not sure, but I can't afford to sort of go to 4 days. Of course I could. So it wasn't as if the excuse was
whether you wanted to.
Yeah, it's whether I wanted to.
It's a decision from
because I was letting something. I had the choice of moving away from the board and being less in control. There's something about letting go of control. Actually, it's a big thing.
Did it feel like freedom when you'd done that?
It did. It totally.
Don't we all want freedom?
It totally
Men
did.
want freedom. Women
I went to 4 days a week, and I thought, well, what do I do in my day a week? And I'd already got involved some years before that in a charity called Fairshare. You might have heard of Fairshare.
Yeah.
And helped set that up. When was it? 25, 30 years ago. I was on the first board. And then, at 50, somebody approached me about getting involved in a homelessness charity called Crisis Centres, now called In Hope. And I became a trustee there. And I only stepped back from that about a year or so ago as chair. And then about 17, 18 years ago, I set up Fairshare Southwest. And that's now quite a big operation. And then 3 years after that, 53, I think we had another event, and I went to 3 days a week. And so it's gradually. And I guess as I look back, I have hugely enjoyed those years. Since this last 17, 18, 19 years, it's been extraordinary. And actually, the more I've let go of those things that were my identity, work and stuff, the more I have discovered a city. I've got friends from every part of the city, every faith group, every social standing, every ethnic group, and it's been a privilege. And I'm still on that journey. As long as I'm able to, I love to continue just doing that.
Do you feel like you've created a new identity? Because I get the feeling that there's probably, there's maybe something's changed. There's a shift.
Yeah, there is a shift.
And it's not like, I would guess, I don't know, I'm looking from the outside looking in. I would guess that you're not sat at home in your pants, scratching your bum until 12 o'clock in the morning, having a bit of breakfast, go out for a coffee, and that's it. I mean, we know that you love a coffee. Decaf. So the amount of coffee you must drink in a day is off the charts. Have you invested in a coffee company?
Yeah, it's a good idea.
You should do.
I should do.
I joke because you meet lots of people, don't you? And that's part of the relationship thing we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
but you're still very active. So you're driven, aren't you? You're driven. So this must have given you a new identity.
I mean, I think I'm a driven person anyway. You know, when I was working flat out, I did put the hours in. And in fairness, in hindsight, probably the detriment of family life. You know, I've not got the privilege, my wife and I, of having 5 amazing grandkids. Amazing. And, you know, I'm seeking to choose that whilst it was very easy for me to get up at 5 in the morning, which I do, and sometimes still be busy if I've got a board meeting of an evening till 10 at night, within the mix of that, I need to be making time for the family. And I do that.
I was going to say, I mean, I know this is something we can all learn from, isn't it? Like, do you actively within your diary put a point in that day that you prioritise something that is not work? And I know this, you say it isn't work, but it is kind of work for you, isn't it?
I don't see it as work for me. I don't see it as a work, but of course, you know, I've got to be very careful. So in the same way that I was a bit of a workaholic around work and it was my identity, I've got to be very careful that I'm not just transferring it from the work environment.
Well, you have, haven't you? I mean, I would
to a degree, but I think that the challenge. I have a bunch of people around me, a number of people who I ask to hold me to account.
Yeah.
You know, so you need, everybody needs that. You know, people who you respect and love enough to know they can tap you on the shoulder and say, look, you need to take a bit of time off. You need to make some. You know, careful what you said there. You know, and Bristol is. It's a bit of a village, isn't it? And, you know, as you spend time getting to know people, you can build relationship and that brings trust. But you're also vulnerable to, if you really do something which is inappropriate, people will get to know. And so for me, you know, integrity and authenticity is hugely important. And sadly, as you look around society, and even if we look over in America at the moment, you know, I'm not going to get political about it, but I struggle when I see, you know, people getting into political power that appear to me, and it may be just the interpretation of the media we get over here, but you know, I would question their integrity and authenticity. If there's one thing that I really struggle with is people who, you know, we get it wrong from time to time. This is a fundamental issue around integrity and authenticity in terms of what they're doing and whether I have a problem with that.
I mean, I wonder whether it's saying that is interesting. Yeah, it could just be what we see over here.
Yeah.
I mean,
I doubt it. I'm also asking myself the question: we got it wrong?
Well, you know, no, but the thing that I find interesting with that is that, you know, you talk to people all the time. I talk to people all the time. I support people all the time. You know what I mean? And you take people and what their wants and needs are and what really matters to them and all these kind of things that sound like cliches. But actually, you know, humanity, you need to listen to people. Otherwise, you're dictating what they need. And that happens way too much with fundraising for the work we do. But that's the kind of thing that I think of when you say that about, you know, about Mr. Trump and what have you and that regime that's going on there. Lots of people voted for him. So are we saying that over half of that country, that population, and whatever amount it is huge, don't see this? There must be some things that they experience day to day that is absolutely like off the chart. That make them. I can't believe people are that blind. There must be things that we don't see and experience.
I guess that's
I'm not a Trump fan, but I'm putting it in context. I guess there's got to be a reason why they're voting for him.
I guess that's right. But you know, the reality is, you know, over half the country voted for Trump, and he won the election relatively simply or easily. But if you talk to a good majority of the people in the UK, certainly the people I know and the friends that I have from all over the city, they're sitting there scratching their heads saying, what's all that about? and you know, then you sort of question: Is it media? Have we got it wrong? Actually, you know, is he right all along? And actually, all this stuff about his, you know, his lifestyle and stuff that he's done in the past. You know, I don't know. I bet
there's more to come out there.
But one of the things I've got to be careful about is that I'm doing exactly what I did when I was much younger, which was being judgmental.
Exactly.
You know, one of the things that I was deeply challenged about in my late 40s and since then is the fact that how do I transfer that tendency to be judgmental, particularly from a faith perspective, to a point where I am open to wanting to build a relationship with anyone. Irrespective of their background, irrespective of what they might. I mean, I do a lot of work in the criminal justice system. You know, I've run 2 or 3 charities, started 2 or 3 charities working with ex-offenders. And, you know, what does it look like when you're publicly saying, I believe that no one is beyond redemption, no one is beyond, you know, a situation where, you know, they can over time, even though they might have done the most horrendous thing, they can't go on a journey.
Well, what was the journey that set them off to do that?
What was the journey? And the reality is that this isn't an excuse for anybody's behaviour or what they might have done. But certainly when I, you know, go down to Bristol Prison, and you, particularly when you engage with younger people who have got into prison, often drug-related, gang-related, if you look at their story, from even before they were born,
you can identify generally what's going to happen.
So my question would be, they didn't stand a chance. Didn't stand a chance. Now that isn't saying, oh, we'll let them off and whatever, but we have to recognise, particularly from a privileged background, you know, it's very easy to, you know, I see people who go through prison, they do their time, they come out and society still wants more. You know, and how do we get to a place where we just take time to stand back and understand someone's journey, you know, from not being wanted even when they were in the womb, to get into a place to come into a family where there's single parent, family breakup, family trauma, you know, you name it, and the potential that has to rob them of their own personal potential.
I'd say,
and everybody stands a chance.
Well, everyone deserves a chance, and everyone's got some kind of talent, and I think that everyone wants
without exception.
Yeah. And everyone wants to have a life that is meaningful and doesn't, you know, and they're safe. Yeah. You know, and all the other things that come into Maslow's hierarchy, and all of that. Yeah. But what I'd say is as well that it's interesting, and then we don't have to get massively political, but if that is the case, and people that maybe from more privileged backgrounds, alongside people from similar communities of those young people that are going in that journey towards prison, if we already know the indicators, and we know through research, it's not just through that's it, that they're going to be going probably in that direction, why then, as a government, blue or red or whatever other colour that might be in, why aren't we developing those meaningful interventions that are getting to the heart of nub of the problem straight away? I spoke to someone yesterday. This is like when you said, why are you inviting me on air? I spoke to someone yesterday, someone I met at a course, which is where I met your friend, Tom. And he's from Australia. He's a coach, and he coaches lots of different people. And he was talking to me about oh God, I've lost my train of thought now. What were we talking about?
I don't know. You're talking about how do you prevent that sort of inevitability of people getting into crime? You know, is it something you can do, you know, within the context of, you know, their earlier life to avoid it? Is that what you say? Whichever political party?
Yeah, I was going somewhere with that particularly, but I mean, I guess the key thing is we know, don't we, who those people are. Yeah. So if we know who those people are, why aren't we putting in those interventions now?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's
and I'd argue. Is it something? Well, I mean, not I argue. What do you think it is? Because people come into power for 4 years. Yes, they might be in there for 8 years. What's the reason why?
It's a difficult one because look, you know, I know this city well, and I'm sure Bristol's no different from most other cities. You know, where, you know, from history, if you turn the clock back to, you know, the 17th, 18th century, it was even more stark. There were very few number of people who were
less people knew about
landed gentry, and you know the vast majority of people were living in dire poverty with no education, etc., etc. And you could say, compared to where we were 200 or 300 years ago, we're in a better place, but we're in a place that is still riddled with inequality and injustice. You know, in terms of education, in terms of family support, in terms of income, in terms of basic aspects of poverty. And I'm no politician at all, and I've never felt at all that I was somebody that would be involved in politics. But I care about issues that are political issues. And if you take the criminal justice system, I've been involved in 2 or 3 things that have and still are, where we can show simply by building a relationship with people. And giving them an opportunity to understand what it is to be loved and cared for in a safe community with a place they can call home and a meaningful job that gives them purpose. You can reduce the reoffending rate from 50-60% in the first year or two to 1 or 2%. You can do that, but it takes time.
Well, it
takes time. And one thing that I'd say, so we've got a new minister. Lord Timpson, who's come in, the guy. The key man, the shoe man. His dad set it up, and Timpson's come in, and that for me that was an enlightened moment on behalf of government, because here's a guy who believes in giving people a chance. He believes in giving them a job,
and he's grown up knowing that.
And he's grown up knowing that from his dad. It's in his DNA. Yeah. So when he announces, we have the ability, if we choose, to be able to put in place a proper response as a society to give people that chance, we can significantly reduce our prison population, by 30-40%. Now society would say, "Oh, you can't let them out. Goodness me, we're in danger. Lock them all up." That's what America are doing.
But they privatise their whole system.
What they're doing is a lot of money over a generation. They are simply making the situation fundamentally worse.
Yeah, but doesn't that then fuel someone's pocket?
Yeah, but it costs more money. And so, but the reality is to be able to show, the evidence that more community-based approach works. It takes time, and because of the cycle of political leadership, you need a government that's got. The guts. I always use another phrase. Got the guts. Got the guts to say we're going to instigate an approach, and I hope Timpson does. We're going to instigate an approach that we won't prove fundamentally in the first 4 years. It might not be in the first 8 years, but we know that we can both, bring a real sense of hope and life transformation to people. And significantly reduce the societal cost, financial and otherwise, and also significantly reduce the cost of the state of putting people in prison. And we can achieve that. And I absolutely fundamentally believe it's achievable.
But politicians
haven't got the guts to be able to do that, because they can't show at the end of 4 years it's worked.
So let me do what I was going to say before.
Now, maybe that's a simplistic way of looking at it.
Well, I think it's a fair. It's a fair. It seems fair to me. What I was going to say then, when I was chatting to this Australian guy, and he was talking about like parenting and how over there, supporting parents to understand how to. They might not have had great parenting when they were growing up, whatever their situation was, and then it's systemic, isn't it? And
we talked about one issue. There are systemic issues.
Let me make the point, but that feels to me, and I said to him then, I was like, oh yeah, I hear from youth workers that older than me that were around back in the day and I remember Sure Start as a thing from my childhood or whatever. But the point is that there was things like that worked, and I hear people talking about how amazing it was and how it worked. Yes, there would have been things that could be improved. And he was talking about, specifically about that support in different ways for parents to support their children in a more positive light.
Yep.
Now, that's obviously huge.
Yeah.
Why aren't we investing in those things at the beginning? Because what you spoke about is down the stream, right? That's needed, right? Because obviously society is where it is a big thing, a timeline. Yeah. But right there, at 12 years old, is where we know that what gets put in there financially and the support impacts on what happens through a lifetime.
Yep.
And what happens through a lifetime impacts on even more people. Now, I'm not a rocket scientist, but doesn't it seem like that is where, if we're going to reset and say, right, we're going to do this for the next 12 years, 8 years, we're going to have the backbone as the Labour, Conservative, Greens, whoever it is, Lib Dems, and we're going to put our flag in the ground and we're going to go, right, we're doing it. Whoever takes over next time, hopefully they carry on.
No, it goes back to my point that, if we can go upstream, and start to, the question is, at the moment, what we're trying to do, you look at a river, what we're doing, we're going downstream, we're trying to pull people out and save them.
That's not an intervention, is it?
It's not an intervention.
It is an intervention, but it's too late.
It's a form of intervention. It's too late. The most effective thing is always to go upstream. How can we create a series of interventions? And I'm absolutely 100% with you. The reality is that, whether it's a political issue or whether it's an investment issue or people haven't got the guts to do it. The reality is, if you look at most of the work of charitable and voluntary sector organisations across a city like Bristol, increasingly a lot of people are trying to do that. They're working with children and families.
But they are, but with limited resources.
Yeah, that's the point.
And there lies the issue that if those resources were more widespread, then it would have a wider impact.
I totally agree with you.
And I don't know. I wonder. I've said it before to someone who was on it. I think it was Claire Moody. You probably know. Yeah.
Claire,
and because I didn't realise she was connected with government in days gone by, and I asked her. I think, do you feel like these decisions don't get made to start these interventions earlier because people within these different parties maybe haven't experienced? Similar to your story, what you were saying, haven't experienced and seen with the whites of their eyes the impact of a lot of the kind of the limited support and provisions that lots of young people get in many communities across the country. And she was like, she actually said that she thinks actually there's a lot more people within the Labour government that have seen that with the whites of their eyes growing up.
Yeah, there's a lot of people with experience. Yeah, that's true.
And I'd argue maybe that isn't the case so much with the Conservatives. I don't know for sure. But surely when you go into government to serve the people, it doesn't matter what background you're from, you go and look at what's needed and you make those right decisions. And I don't see it happening right now. I know it's early days for Labour, but that's what I don't get. If you're of service to people, you look at the systemic problems and you try and solve them. And
we're not at odds on that, Ben.
No,
we don't disagree 100%. And I think, it's how do we, in a city like Bristol, particularly, in the one city thing we've got, how do you seek to, as you bring politicians and business and the voluntary sector and the faith sector and civic life, how do you bring those together and how can you have a grown-up conversation about some of those early interventions? And there's more of, I would say there's probably more of that happening now than there was 10, 15 years ago. The reality is, though, it's still in pockets.
Well, you've got to be at the table, Andy, haven't you? Because when I think about the one city, I think I probably should shut my mouth now, but I'm not going to. Sorry. When I think about the idea around the one city thing, I agree with. But I remember in my own experience of this, with the Children and Young People Board when it was being set up, through the fellowship of University of Bristol, I was able to support that. And I remember at that point thinking, there's no young people on this board. Why don't you have a shadow board of young people? And I'm not going to go into details about it because I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. But the point was they didn't at that point, and they definitely didn't have young people from representing all the underserved communities across the city. So that didn't feel like such a great thing. And then when I was hearing that the young people were a priority for one city office at this particular point, and then I started flagging, and this is partly where GAP come from. I was like, there is no process, there is no journey, pathway, whatever you want to call it, for a young person who wants to get into youth and community work to do face-to-face practical courses that would give them the toolkit to support what you're trying to achieve.
Which is why you do GAP.
Which is why I done GAP. But this is the point.
Which is why I liked it.
Yeah, I know. And which is why I like it, because you get it. But what I'm trying to say is there's people that come up with meaningful solutions to things. But I might be looking at it in the wrong way, but I feel like if you're not at the right tables, then the things that are really making an impact that could be scaled or could be amplified, and I'm not talking about me because I'm not a summit seeker, but I am saying about those things that have been proven to work where there's a problem. If you're not at those certain tables, I don't think that you get those opportunities. Now, I wonder from someone that is at a lot of tables, how does that change?
Yeah, I think one of the ways it changes, it's partly why, when I got to know you, Ben, one of the things I did was to say, how through connections can we make more people aware of the work that you're doing? And when you have a situation where, if you have one individual, or one funder that very, very in a low key way, was providing the support, and you just get on with it. There's not enough people in the city that know about it. And so when you get a group of people who can share that journey with you, they are on a learning process too. I think any relationship is two-way. I think a relationship where I get to know Ben because we may be in a position to be able to help you financially in some way, and we're doing you a favour.
And that hasn't been the biggest support of your help for me.
But the issue is that when you get people who engage, whether it's volunteering their time, which actually I think is more valuable than the money, or whether it's providing financial support, if they're sharing the journey, they benefit hugely, because many of those people don't necessarily come from a challenged or marginalised background, but they learn a lot, and their eyes are opened. And in their area of influence, they're able to go and say, "I've learned something. I've been on I'm still learning every day of this that I live. Today I'm learning stuff." And if we're open as we get older to being able to use whatever influence we've got, and to recognise that we can learn and use that to then start to influence, it takes time. That's where the relationship bit goes in. Well, there's something about standing at the front of something and trying to tell people what they should do doesn't work. Yeah. When you build relationship and people are starting to understand that there is inequality and injustice, and actually there is a way in which we can look at those upstream interventions, and they make a huge amount of difference. And it's all about relationship, but ultimately, we'll find as we move down the track, it actually makes not only common sense, it makes financial sense.
Well, that's the thing.
But
put more in now, save more in the future.
So, it takes time, but it shouldn't stop those of us that are able to do something to continue doing it.
I think this fits
but we
in.
We need more politicians that are willing to put their neck on the line.
Yeah, because it fits into the same kind of the circle that we're talking about. You've got voluntary sector that's having to step up into a space where the government has previously done the work, which has been more widespread. Yeah. There's been more career progression, development to improve skills, all those kind of things. Yeah. You could see the impact easier because it's been a wider government-led thing. And then suddenly you've got small organisations doing great things, but to get to the point where things scale that work, you then need to be in a situation where you're building those relationships at the table to increase that impact. Now, and this is the reality of most small organisations, they're not. And they might have some brilliant ambassadors, Andy Streets of this world, that actually believe in a lot of this stuff and support it with their own time. But to make that go wider, it's a constant drip feed, isn't it? And it's not just, and like you said, you need to have like a small team of people that are banging the drum, and for that to get that as a small, if you're at the front line all the time, it's very difficult for that to happen. So it's a difficult thing. I know it's possible, but that's the journey. That's the journey many people are on.
Yeah, it is.
I wonder whether you would, because I don't really know much about this, to be honest with you, and I thought to myself earlier on, with regard to philanthropy, how does it work? Now I get the feeling from chatting to you that Andy rocks up and has a cup of coffee with lots of different people, builds relationships, and nothing necessarily comes from those relationships, or there might be opportunities that come from that, or there might be things you want to support. When I quickly done a quick Google earlier on, it came up with 3 things.
What have you found?
No, well, three things, and I wonder, like, if you could, from your, and you might say, I don't know what you're on about that. It might be a lot more simple than what I'm going for. But the 3 things it said, the different forms of philanthropy, was charitable giving, strategic philanthropy, philanthropic investments. Yeah. Now, I don't know, but I would guess you might do a little bit of all of that. Could you give us some examples of those 3 things, or things that you've done, so people kind of get? Yeah, because this is behind the scene, isn't it? Really,
it is. So, from my wife and I, it's very much behind the scenes. We've been hugely privileged in terms of the lifestyle that we have, and how the business has done, and I'm a big believer in how we decide to be able to support in any way, is we want to do that in a way which people will barely notice. But I'm a big believer as much in a whole range of things. You probably what you've listed there.
Could you give us an example of the charitable giving side? I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to, but I'm just trying to give a bit of meat.
Charitable giving, it's actually, to be honest, a high proportion of people, in any city will be involved in some sort of charitable giving, even if it's at a relatively modest level. For me, it isn't really about how much as a willingness,
like the amounts,
a willingness to put skin in the game. So I'm involved in lots of charities, too many charities, and all of them, if you aggregate the funds that are needed to keep those running year on year, it's quite a few million. If you put them all together as the turnover of this group of charities. But I would seldom stand up in front of a group of people and talk about money. I'd much rather share the story, talk about its impact. I'd much rather create a vision and get people understanding the difference that we can make.
You'd make a good politician.
No, and they get passionate about it. And the reality is that when people connect, they understand the narrative. They have a moment where they think, blimey, you're doing some great work. You barely need to talk about money. Now, some might say, well, that's a bit naive. But actually, I'm a believer that it isn't. It's similarly when I'd always encourage people to, it's for some people, particularly wealthy people, it's much easier to write a check than it is
and not to be involved,
to make time to get involved in some way or other.
Yeah. Both is key.
But both is fantastic, particularly for yourself running an organisation.
Yeah.
But I think that I've always been when I was in full-time work, I and even more latterly when I've been part-time, I always enjoyed the business development side of winning work, and I would always do it by building relationship. If I was wanting to win a client over, whether it was in work or whether it's a funder, I would always build a relationship. I might have 2 or 3 meetings where I don't even mention opportunities or money.
And may I say that is what's missing from most small organisations, and the bigger ones have got people that are good at that. Yeah. And that's that whole capacity cycle.
And I agree with you, and that's the issue. But So our whole approach, I think just basic charitable giving is great. I think there's room also for some organisations can benefit from simple investment. That we've got. I mean, I ran the city funds. I was chair of city funds, and we were looking at investments from 100,000 up to $1 million. Over the last few years, and obviously with those we've got to do due diligence. It's a regulated fund, and we've done some really good work. Ambition Alliance Western, with the wind turbine, a whole bunch of other things that we've done.
You would say that something like the wind turbine, that was more strategic.
It was repayable investment, not really philanthropy as such as social investment, social good.
Would whoever invested it, say it was city funds, would that mean that then you'd invest and then you'd have an interest rate on top, and then what the money that comes back covers their cost?
That's different because the basic capital that we were using came partly from the council, partly from Good Society Capital. Now there's other ways of doing it, where a few years ago I was involved in setting up something called Bristol Together. Right. It still exists, but when we set it up, we worked with Triodos Bank and we brought together a modest investment of around about 2 million. That was, individuals put in an amount of money. Esme Fairburn, as a large funder, put in $500,000, and other people put in an amount of money. And it was held for 5 years. And when we were running it, we were buying. The housing market worked well then. We were buying houses in need of renovation, and we would then employ ex-offenders to be able to to do them up and to learn a skill. And over 5 years, when we ran that scheme in Bristol through the Triodos, it was called a CITR, Community Income Tax Relief thing. So investors would get a good return on their investment. Then it was probably 7 or 8%, and they get their money back at the end of the 5 years. In the meantime, over that 5 years, we employed something like 50 or 60 young men who had been through prison, and during that time, we had 1 or 2 that reoffended. I mean, the reduction in reoffending rate was unparalleled.
So did that
simply by but the financial bit was at the end of that 5 years. Everybody had been paid quarterly interest. And at the end of it, we paid the money back in full, and we still had a profit left over. So we used, a philanthropic, if you will, social investment fund that commercially worked. We transformed the lives of 50, 60 people who'd gone through prison, who probably would have reoffended.
And the people that put that money in, they still got back what interest they would have got that would have been in there if it was in their bank.
No, you got more.
So they get. Well, I'm going to get that bit, and then they got more.
They got the money back.
So it's a win-win. So it is obviously the point that you need to have the money to start with, but it's a great way of doing it.
Yeah, but there's other models where you don't have to have 50,000 quid to put in.
No.
You can set up models. We're looking at something in the city at the moment. I can't say what it is, but where we, there are ways in which effectively you can put just a modest amount of money in, but still be part of a bigger picture of creating a fund that transforms the city.
Did that model you just spoke about then, that with the people that have been in prison that have come out, that learnt a trade, learnt a skill, obviously that's helped change their life. They've done up the house in the process. There was money made from the houses. The whole thing oiled itself.
Yes.
Did that model get utilised in another place?
It did. It started here in Bristol. It was an amazing guy called Paul, who's, I met Paul, when it was his idea. It wasn't mine, but I journeyed with him, in those formative years, and then we set the fund up. And it was very successful in Bristol. And we looked at setting it up elsewhere in 2 or 3 other locations. It wasn't quite so successful.
Is that because you weren't? I suppose you were.
It's down to individuals.
You were all in Bristol.
It's down to individuals. Bristol together still. If you Google it, it's still doing great work in Bristol. Okay. It's funded differently, but they're still doing great work. They're still employing ex-offenders. They're still doing great work. There's a lovely guy called Paul Morgan. Call out for Paul, who runs that, and it's great. It's a different commercial model than it was when we started it 10, 15 years ago, whenever it was. But I'm just saying that social impact investing model can be a really good part, and it's something I believe in. It's partly because the other thing you can do is soft loans. There's a particular
When you say soft loan, does that just basically mean you loan something to someone and the interest rate is...
You lend an amount of money over a fixed period of time for, I would often say, nominal interest. Now, some people might want a higher return. But the nice thing about that sort of investment, if you give it, that's great. All sorts of organisations need different things. Some of them will need simply philanthropic giving. Some can take, like Ambition Alliance Western, they can take a repayable investment and create an amazing environmental project that is renewable, is sustainable,
which will save money over time.
But it creates income
through the electricity.
For the guys in line. Yeah, absolutely. So it's an amazing thing.
I mean,
but you can do other things.
Places, in other places. I wonder. So with that kind of model, is there another thing where you're putting in? Because a lot of funders, don't they? They got money, whatever their interest is. Yeah. They then give out that interest, and a lot of small organisations they haven't got something that makes money, do they? Yeah. So to take a loan, you've got to try and create some kind of income to pay back the loan. So that must be shaky for someone. Yeah, like
one of the challenges. So here we had it with to a degree with city funds. What we don't want to do is work with a charity where all we do is create indebtedness.
Yeah.
So not
for
every,
the right reasons.
Not every charity is able to do that, but many charities, create a degree of revenue. So we're moving from there's a continuum that says you're a charity that's 100% reliant on grants.
Yeah.
You could be a social business where it's social aims, but you're creating effectively a profit. In between on this continuum, you get organisations that are less reliable on grant and they're generating income to a point where if you get to 75, 80% of your income being generated through your activity, your revenue,
it pays for that, doesn't it?
You get into a good place. And there are many social enterprises that are doing that.
The reason why I find it interesting, and I suppose it's only from my perspective, which, whatever that is that you can see, can't you, that if there's a way for charities that are making a difference on the ground in their communities in lots of different ways, normally that involves grants. If there's a way of them creating an income or something, some kind of enterprise that earns them some kind of money that allows them to do that without having to be cap in hand all the time, that's the key to the kingdom. But then that involves so much more capacity to actually have the staff that can do that. You're like you're starting up another business, so it's quite a big leap, isn't it? And then you've got to have the idea that works.
Not every charity can do that.
No,
but there are increasing number who do start to generate a bit of income. Yeah. I've just taken on there's a project in the city. There's a project in the city called the Bristol Methodist Centre. It's been around 100 years. It's a homeless charity or homeless organisation. The Methodist Church was struggling to keep running it, so we've taken it over under a new charity called Turnaround Bristol. And it's it doesn't generate any income at the moment. But what we've done is taking it over. We're looking at a fairly significant investment to convert the building where we can create 5 housing units with income coming in, housing benefit, and also additional space that we can rent out. So what we can do is move away from reliance completely on charitable income and get to a place where that operation is starting to generate income and also increasing the impact of the fact that we don't just have people coming for lunch, a drop-in centre, but we can actually provide some housing. That's moving.
Well, you make the money, don't you?
So both ends. You generate income, but also starting to contribute to people's lives. But they're not just continuing to be in homelessness. We've actually got a route into housing and hopefully into employment.
And that's providing social housing, which is obviously something we need massively.
Correct.
Then there's a private element of that as well, which means that there's going to be some more income for the project.
Yep.
And then property is always going to go up, isn't it?
Correct, that's right.
If it's a long-term investment, it's always going to go up. So
normally, an asset-backed investment, investing in property that's going to retain its value, is fairly low risk.
So that sounds like the philanthropic investments.
It is a philanthropic investment, correct.
Angle. Do you think that? And I don't know what the times are like. I don't know, like 25, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Do you think that the charitable kind of work that many does, if it fell under more of the kind of the government funded through a government, youth services and such alike, similar things. Do you think that's the mecca, or do you think actually the voluntary sector and people being able to develop their own things based on the need, that's a better way? I'll say no more. It's just it'd be interesting.
Look, I mean that's a political question really, because the reality is that we've got to be very careful. I do a lot of work in the charitable sector, not-for-profit sector, and often we are working in partnership with local government really well, and they contribute towards that particular project in ways that they're able to.
But any profit goes back into.
But the reality is that it's fair to say, and people often say it, that aren't we simply doing what the government and local authorities should be doing anyway? And that is true to a degree. We're in a season where every single council in this country is struggling with having to make cuts to its budget. Now, there may be political reasons why that's arisen. Many councils have effectively gone into special measures where, because they haven't got a balanced budget, governments are saying we're stepping in and we'll run the council for you. Now Bristol is committed to not having that situation, but it's having therefore to make cuts, and some of those cuts are going to affect a lot of people, and of course it then puts extra pressure on the voluntary and charitable sector, which itself is under pressure. We're doing some work with Oscar at the moment that's saying if we're not careful, it's the pressure on charitable giving is huge. Secondly, we've had the NI increase from our current government.
Well, everything, increase to the cost
so
of
all
living.
of that
Everything
is so reduced public sector funding, increased challenges on charitable support, social investments, or whatever it might be. And the risk is that we're going to see people dropping between the two.
I think we already do.
Yeah. And so that, if I'm honest, that keeps me awake at night. That troubles me. That we're in a situation where we have too many people. I do a lot of work in the food insecurity, food poverty field. There are far too many people still, in fact, increasing numbers of parents, single and otherwise, who have to basically choose between they either go hungry and feed their kids, or they go hungry and be able to put the lights on, give them some food. They can't afford to put the energy on to put their cooker on. And that's the reality of life. And that is fundamentally wrong in, whatever we are, 6th, 7th, largest economy in the world, to have a situation when a city like Bristol, so many people are facing the basics of poverty is a crying and criminal shame.
Would you say, just very briefly, those other economies that are higher, do they have the same problem?
No, you have a huge
because
problem. You go to America.
Poverty.
I travel a lot with my work, and I go to places that would be considered
the equal countries probably have.
Yeah, so I would go to America. Big issues, and they're going to get worse. The rich are going to get. I'm going to make a political statement. In my view, as I see it, the rich are going to get richer. The poor are going to get poorer. Or they're going to get thrown out. It's a very selfish approach, and I don't mind being quoted on that. But equally, I go to Australia, I go to New Zealand, I go to South Africa, politically, they're doing all they can, I'm sure, but there are still people falling beneath the cracks, between the cracks, and that's the reality of it. It seems to me, whichever society you go to, we're always going to have a degree of need. But that's what gets me out of bed in the morning at some crazy hour. And others too. I'm not the only one. There's lots of people who care.
But to be honest with you, that is what I was just about to say. I think the big come away from this for people that won't necessarily know some of the things that go on behind the scenes in the city. There's lots of people that are well-meaning, that do a lot, that may have come from a background of business, that actually put a lot of their skills and some of their wealth into things that make a difference for others that are less fortunate. And if that wasn't happening now, I cannot even explain the reality of the storm of that would be honest, at this point. And I guess if other people that are listening to this that have an interest in being involved in some way and making a difference, that does have that background, you would be a very good person to talk to, wouldn't you? You love a coffee.
I think, in my last comment, Ben, because we probably need to finish, my last comment would be, I think there's lots of people who want to make a difference. My passion over more recent years has been to say, how can we do that in a more joined up strategic way? And we're seeing a little bit of that happen. I know you had a little bit of a go at the one city, but I think we've got to.
I think it works in a lot of ways.
I think we're in a city where there's a greater recognition of the importance of collaboration and partnership. And I work hard at how do you build those networks, those conversations, where there's greater awareness and more joined upness, if you will, if that's not a word, in terms of how we do that response. So it's not just individuals who are well-meaning and doing their bit. It's individuals who are journeying with others in a joined up way to do joined up work to make sure that you and others who are at the coalface, we're not at the coalface. I mean, I am to a degree in some areas, but you are the guys who work your socks off to work with young people who, it wasn't for you guys, and there are plenty of other organisations in this city, they would be really struggling. They would never realise their potential.
But being heard is one thing, but it's action that comes from it. If I give you a real simple analogy, and Native American Indians, they use a talking stick, don't they? Everyone in that room has their voice heard. It doesn't matter whatever everyone's got something to offer, and that's part of the issue that and it's not anyone's fault. It's not one city's fault. But it's everyone's voice is not part of the discussion. And not only is it not, even if you do become part of the discussion, it's then what action happens from those that got more of an understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, and I get that.
And there are ways of that being kind of resolved a bit more. And we spoke to someone called Martin Biss, who you all know.
I know Martin.
Who was but again, but he's probably on the similar kind of circuit as yourself. And he was talking about an idea, which none of it's rocket science, but it is about funding those people that are on the coalface to be at a table, to talk about the things that matter, and then for them to go off and do the work to be funded to do it. And I mean, I think, like, let's be honest, then that's not a talk shop. That creates...
Yeah, we need to be... there isn't a time for talking. There's also a time for listening.
Yeah.
Big time. But there's a time for doing as well. And I just think that we do it better when we've gathered the right people and we've listened. And we've then gone off and said, how can we do this better together? And we'll see. Yeah.
Thank you for all your support over the years, and I mean that. I
hope you'll continue, mate.
No.
When's our next coffee?
Well, good point. Let's get one in the diary. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for asking me. It's been a privilege.
And
I hope I
thanks for
haven't
sharing
bored
your
you or
story.
anybody else, but it's been good fun.
Take care.
All right, mate.